So let's get underway with our first talk. Peter, if you would make your way up front, please. Our first speaker is Peter Van Hardenberg, the lab director of Ink and Switch. We had the pleasure of meeting one of Peter's colleagues at the last meeting, and he's going to talk to us today about how to do ambitious research. Certainly seems like an appropriate time to be asking that question. For those of you who may have been with us yesterday, you probably heard Peter asking many thoughtful questions during the course of both the workshop and the field trip, so I look forward to his opinions today. And I generally don't do this, but Peter's bio is extremely brief, so it's very convenient for me to do this, and I think it's a great summary of the diversity of his background. So Peter has worked as an Arctic oceanographer, a game developer. He's wrangled millions of Postgres databases, and he's now executive director of Ink and Switch, where he plots the future of tools for thought. So give us some tools for thought, Peter.
There we go. All right. Well, thank you so much. Okay. Well, thank you for having me. Thanks for the introduction, Tony. I guess I should say that I submitted this abstract in the previous administration. So this is not a politically motivated commentary on the news of the day. If anybody has answers that are slightly more updated, you know, I don't have any more answers than anybody else. And I want to say that, you know, I'm in really wonderful company here, and I am, you know, this is a bombastic title, you know, it's attention grabbing, but I want to approach this with humility. I'm here to tell you how we're trying to do ambitious research and in this sort of present era. The destiny of computers are to become an interactive intellectual amplifier for a globally networked intelligence. This is JCR Licklider. It's actually Alan Kay paraphrasing JCR Licklider. This is an incredible vision for the potential of technology. Sure. But how do we get there? Right? That ultimately is the question that our lab exists to try and help answer. Yeah, and I'm Peter. I'm with Ink and Switch. We're an industrial research lab. I have a background in industry. I've built cloud software, media players. Used to go out to sea sometimes on this ship. This actually is kind of important. It colors my perspective on research because I worked in the field just as a support programmer for the Arctic Research Program in Canada. But today I work with Ink and Switch, and we are an independent industrial research lab, and we're studying tools for thought. We're an industrial research lab, and in many ways that makes us perhaps less ambitious or more near-term focused than some of the people in this room, right? Like, our goal is transfer to the field, and we're independent, which means we have no organizational affiliation. We don't have regular government funding. Nobody has tenure. We're not part of a university. We're not owned by a corporation. We are a weird free radical. And we work on tools for thought, and tools for thought are building on this tradition of, you know, Licklider and Van Nevar, Alan Kay, Engelbart, Bonnie Nardi, all these wonderful people. And we're trying to carry that torch a little bit because we feel that it's so important today and always, and it's just under-resourced. And so crucially, we sit in a weird spot. We're not academia, but we're not industry either, and we're going to talk a little bit about why. And this image is the Smalltalk hot air balloon escaping the ivory tower of Xerox PARC. So what's an industry guy doing at a research lab? Well, if we believe this claim, then we should have these wonderful bicycles for the mind that Steve Jobs wrote about, right? Our computers are bicycles for the mind. You open up your laptop, you pull out your phone, and you feel like instantly smarter, empowered, capable. I think instead of building bicycles for the mind, we've built aircraft carriers for the mind. Right? We've got these enormously capable, very powerful, expensive, complex instruments. And it takes, you know, an army of people just to get anything done today. Right? How many people build software as part of their practice? Does it feel like you're riding a bicycle when you're writing software? I didn't think so. And of course, we have a simple solution. We'll just phew, sprinkle a little AI on it, right? Okay, no problem. We've seen this theme throughout our tour yesterday. It's not just Vanderbilt. I'm not picking on you guys. It's everybody, everywhere. And of course, we all know that if you just sprinkle a little AI on it, you can get funded, so no hard feelings, I get it. But, you know, I want to be a serious man. I don't want to wade into that debate too much. Instead of doing research, we'll let the startups handle it. Startups, they're innovation engines, right? The problem is, I've been on that side of the fence. A startup has one job and one job only. That is scale. Take an idea, get to product market fit, get to $100 million in ARR, and either get bought by Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon, whoever, or IPO. That's your responsibility. That is the trade you take as a founder. You take the money, you got a ticket for the ride. Okay, so that's not going to work. Big tech will save us. Not Microsoft, though. Apple. Okay, not Apple. Maybe the Linux people will do it? Government. Oh, there we go. All right, well, I guess it's up to us, right? And not just us by any means, but this is basically how we wound up doing this, right? As a bunch of folks who had been in the startup community, who had started companies, who had built tech companies and sold them, you know, we perceived this gap, which was that the kinds of things we thought were important were not possible to do within the vehicles that we understood or had access to. And so that's where this lab came out of. And so as an approximation, nobody out there is trying to make computers for people who think, right? They're trying to make computers for people who do business, right? Serve enterprise needs or consumer needs, right? But people who think for a living are, you know, we have all these problems in society. Who is going to build the tools for them? And this is ultimately our mission. So, you know, I do want to note, I put a little asterisk on that last slide. On the right, we have some historical examples. The top one is the Sage system. It was one of the first major computers. I think they built 25 of them or so, and they were all a 4-story building with 1.5 hectare of computer inside a giant concrete bunker. Underneath that is Sketchpad. That's Sutherland, the first CAD software. But on the left, carrying on this tradition, is Brett Victor's Dynamic Land. How many people know Dynamic Land? Dynamic Land is an incredible experimental research project Brett Victor has been doing for a number of years. If you're not familiar with his work and you're in this room, you really ought to be. His work is phenomenal.
If I could interrupt for one moment.
Beg your pardon?
I'll just add that several years ago, we did a field trip to Dynamic Land.
Yeah. Dynamic Land is incredible. And the idea here is to embody computation in physical space. So you see on the table there all of those little pieces of paper with dots around the outside. Each of those is a little part of a program, and they can talk to each other. And so Brett is out there in the world trying to bring these ideas of like a shared computational environment to people. Okay, so we're going to start a research lab. I mean, how hard could it be? All right, no big deal. Step 1, try something. Step 2, think about it. Step 3, tell someone. Step 4, go to 1. Boom. It's Dijkstra. So, you know, research is a systematic investigation of the unknown, right? That's how it's different from products. The output of research is new knowledge. And the output of, the output of research is new knowledge. The output of products is like things that people use in a first order sense, and ideally some profit from that. And so research is also systematic. It's different from art, right? We're trying to learn things. Our process we call the Hollywood model. And we have done dozens of these projects over the years now. I'm going to tell you a little bit about it because I think it's sort of novel. And I inherited this from our previous lab director, Adam Wiggins. And he was inspired by the model of film productions where, you know, when you make, research labs are often like long tenure, long projects, small fixed staff, right? And he was inspired by this idea of a film production, which is, you put together a team around a particular project. You might have regular collaborators, but it's sort of like, the casting director moves on to the next job once the cast is picked. And so we use this model to try and put together flexible teams of experts for whatever project we're doing. It has 3 steps: pre-infusion, execution, and then writing and reflection. The idea of pre-infusion, do we have coffee people in the room? Yes. So pre-infusion is before you pull an espresso shot, which is intense pressure and like a short time. First you want to pre-soak the coffee, pre-soak the puck for a few seconds. And that opens up the coffee so that everything else goes better. Okay, and so during our pre-infusion time, this is sort of, before the main effort, right? And in this time, we do a bunch of technical de-risking. We build some sort of spikes of things. We, talk to users who we think might be interested to make sure we're on the right track. We build a team, and then once we have clarity about what we're doing, we go into execution mode. I call this time kind of being in the tunnel, because me as director, I don't get to do all the fun stuff. And so, during the pre-infusion, there's all this light and sound, and people are doing cool things, and I'm talking to new folks coming on board and all that stuff, and then they go into the tunnel, and you kind of don't really have any visibility about what's happening from outside. And that is really intense. They're head down, they're working full time on whatever we're doing. We sort of try and have, we call it show and tell on Fridays. Should mention, we're a distributed group. We're stretched from Central European time to West Coast time. And so show and tell is the one time a week where we're all together for a good chunk of time. We spend an hour and a half together. And just sort of whatever you've been up to, that's your chance to share it. And so every couple of weeks during projects, people will pop up and sort of say, this is what we've been doing, here's the vibe, this is what do people think. And throughout all this, we aspire to what Andy Matuszczak calls authentic use, right? And this is, again, part of our industrial focus. We try and build things that can be used for a real purpose. I find often in sort of like programming language research and software generally research, people get a little bit hypothetical. So we like to try and really connect to actual use cases. And then finally, there's writing and reflection. And writing is thinking. When asked about his notebooks, whether his notebooks were a record of his work, Feynman famously said, that is the work. Right? You're not looking at me writing down what I thought. You see the product of my thinking. And so during this sort of, it can be quite intense writing software and really trying to wrestle anything that works off the deck of the aircraft carrier. And so afterwards, we try and write as we go, but often, in the hurry to get something, anything that can fall a bit by the wayside. And so afterwards, it's really nice to take this time as a group, and we sit back and kind of write about what we did. We talk to people, we show it to people, and then we have a sort of iterative process. And ultimately, when we publish, we use what we call the academic voice, right? And we're not in a traditional research institution, we're outside. And so if you go to our website, inkandSwitch.com, you'll see all these things we've written. And so we don't write in a traditional academic voice, but we don't write like a product startup either. And so to give a few examples, we actually have a style guide for this, right? Which is, for example, make no claims without support. No weasel words. If many developers agree, then you should have a source for that, or you can somehow claim it. Avoid absolutism, give credit, be humble, all this kind of stuff. And just the robot there is to remind me to tell you, this is a great example of how AI is integrated in our practice and how we think AI can be empowering, right? I have read many pieces by my colleagues over the year with this style guide on one tab and their writing in the other. Now I have an LLM that gives me a first pass in about 10 seconds and can go through and annotate all the places where someone has made an unsupported claim, right? And this improves our writing. It empowers our writers. It helps people to be more productive. It doesn't replace them, right? It's a force multiplier. It's leverage. Okay, so that's a little bit about us and our practice, or our process. I want to talk about independence. As an independent research lab, we don't have a fixed funding source. We don't have sort of traditional funding body behind us. And so I think of us as revolutionaries, but like not in a cool way, but in like a really like depressing, desperate way, which is that if you're the quartermaster for the revolution, right, you don't have fixed supply lines. You don't have infrastructure, state infrastructure in place to support you. And so a lot of the way I think about our activities are constantly thinking, how do I secure support to go on, right? How do we rally more people to the cause? And I think even if you're in a more established institution, this might be a useful kind of framework to consider your work through, right? In our case, our starting conditions were nothing. You know, we don't have Vanderbilt's name. We don't have, you know, like august researchers with us. We're just a few people who think this work is important and want to get it done. And we really didn't know what we were doing. And so, you know, if you think about this problem like a revolutionary, you realize that the way you attract support is propaganda, right? And I mean that in sort of a technical sense, right? Like, if people don't know what you're doing, if people don't know what you're trying to accomplish, if you don't tell them, if you can't rally them to you, you won't get any help. You're going to stay on your own. And so a big part of our work is focused on this storytelling aspect. We talked a lot about that yesterday in Aaron's workshop. The other thing is that, you know, there are lots of projects that I would love to do, but we have learned to be opportunistic. Is anyone familiar with Code for America? Yeah, Code for America, great people, great program. It's sort of like rehab for startup people. And so what happens is, you know, you've been optimizing the umpteenth point degree of, you know, some Google AdWords product for 6 years, and you went to Stanford for what? And then at the end you go, God, there's no meaning in my life. I hate everything. What am I going to do? I know, I'll join Code for America, and I will build a website for some city. But you're doing it with purpose. And so it's exciting, and it's kind of a chance to give back. And so similarly, InConSwitch has been able to benefit from people getting real burned out on their jobs in big companies, and they come and like do a project with us. And so we've learned to be really opportunistic when interesting and talented people are between projects. We say not, oh, well, you know, we have this CFP process, and here's the thing. It's like, you're available? You got 4 months before you go to grad school or, you know, go to your next job? Great, what can we do? How can we work with you? The other thing that ties into this is we're very careful about how we spend our resources. We don't have a lot, right? And so I think a lot about, you know, can we exercise strategic patience? Why should I do this research? I was talking to Daniel yesterday about getting scooped. I would love to get scooped because it means that somebody else is actually working on the things I care about. Now, I wouldn't love to get scooped if I'd spent 2 years on the project, but you know, my goal is always to look for work that I don't think anyone else is going to do, but that I do think is important, right? I think what's happening in AI is incredibly important. It's incredibly impactful, and it impacts everything we do. But I also understand that if anything interesting is happening in AI, I can sit back and people will spend that money, buy those GPUs, train those models, and I can harvest the benefit and learn from it and build on it. I don't have to be the one doing that work. Someone else is going to do that work for me, right? Take advantage of the strength of your environment. So speaking of environments, these are our research areas.
Question
currently.
down front on the right.
Yeah, please.
Going back to the previous slide, you used the word I there, but yet you have teams
Oh yeah,
to
yeah.
do this.
This is a royal eye.
Well, it's my point is there's some problems. You know, the guy that solved Fermat's last theorem, you know, worked as an individual,
Yeah.
kind of thing. How would, in some sense, that was research work, right?
Uh-huh.
At what point does it say, I need to have enough people to do this particular project?
Yes. So one great thing about software is that in many cases it's, let me think about how to say this. If you want to ship software for the IRS, which I don't, you're going to need a lot of people and a lot of money and a lot of time. But the kind of work that we do tends to be, it's easy to, not easy, it is relatively inexpensive to plumb the core ideas of what our interests are. It's not a mass infantry kind of engagement, if you'll indulge me in this metaphor. It's more of a special forces kind of engagement. And so some of this is also just sort of like tactics, which is if a problem would require 20 engineers, we don't do it. We don't have 20 engineers, I don't have the budget for it, right? And so we're looking for like leverage points for opportunities where small interventions can have a big impact. It's asymmetric, kind of investment. The other answer is that, there's this like old trick in open source, which is if you send a bad pull request to a project, it often is more effective than sending like a well-designed patch, because the maintainer will be so kind of incensed by this like kind of crappy implementation that they'll just fix it. There's a certain degree to which that is what happens with us, which is, we post these sort of prototypes, we write these papers, and then somebody with the engineering resources will go and build it. And maybe a good example is this company, Notion, great business, good product, we use it ourselves. And we did a partnership with them a few years back on rich text CRDT. It's a special kind of data structure that allows offline collaboration. We built a prototype of it. It ran in exponential time, but it had correct, provably correct results. We worked with Martin Kleppman at Cambridge to, make sure all the math checked out. Then they have now spent several years building a production version of that, inside their enterprise, and are now launching that as a product. And so that's a great example of a partnership between, how do we get leverage? Well, we did a small project, we get a big impact from it.
Could I ask a follow-up question
Please,
to
yeah.
that? You started to answer the question I was going to ask, so we might as well run with it. How do you sort of like think about measuring the impact of the work that you're doing?
Oh,
and
yeah.
And do you have
That's a
some
great
sort of
question.
like metrics you can share around that, or like?
Absolutely.
Do you want to be above a certain threshold of?
Yeah. So you manage what you measure, right? I think about this all the time. I think one of the most destructive things you could do would be to measure the wrong thing here. For example, our website has absolutely no analytics. I don't know how many hits it gets. I saw some number the other day because I had to open the Cloudflare to expire the cache, but like I don't know which projects get more reads because I really don't care. Like being on Hacker News, we'll get 100,000 hits, and like Hacker News, if you're not familiar, is like a website for software people where they complain about articles they didn't read. But like we frequently pop up on Hacker News, and then we'll get 100,000 visits or whatever the standard ration of web attention is these days, and nothing will come of it, right? But one visit from somebody in an organization that needs what we do and is going to build on our work can change, the course of industry. And so it's difficult. I mean, I was talking to Alan Kay, and he was saying, research is golf, or so baseball, not golf. It's not a question of like trying to optimize your outcomes, to get reproducibility. It's about getting home runs, right? How many Einsteins per generation was, I think, his phrasing. If someone else remembers how he says this better than me, correct me. But so it's tough. But at the same time, like I have funders who keep us afloat. I need to convince them every year that we're doing things that work. And so I have a few things. One is like, are we publishing? Right? And this time box model, the Hollywood model, is nice because it has a deadline at the end. I always quote Frank Herbert, Arrakis teaches the attitude of the knife, it's finished because I stopped here, right? And so that's a key part of our practice. And then, you go, the deadline is coming, you know what day it's going to be from the beginning, and when you get there, we put the project down and write. You do your best to fill within that time. And so that gives me a little bit of a control knob that helps get things out. I think qualitatively, I look at how many companies are being started using the language that we develop. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a sec. I think about who are the people that are engaging with our work, like what inbound emails, like are these people who are serious or are these people who are unserious? But yeah, I think it's very dangerous to get quantitative, especially if you have the, like a social media driven metric for your research lab. I think you're going to steer yourself the wrong direction. So I worry about that. Let's talk a little bit more about that. These are our research areas. We'll return a bit to this later, but this top one is sort of one of our first main kind of exports, and this is this idea of local first software. It says they're exploring software architecture that returns data to users and enables collaboration in every tool. It's not really what it's about. We can talk about the research, but you're going to find that very little of the things that I care most about are in this talk, because really this is about research more than about our research. It's about process. And so what's neat is, we wrote this paper 6 years ago, I think, and today there's a conference. This is in its second year. It's in Berlin. I'm going to be there next month, right? There are people who are launching their own websites and writing blog posts about it. There's a newsletter. There's an academy. I don't know what that is. People writing tutorials how to do local first software. There's a half a dozen web frameworks. VCs call me. Oh, we're talking to so-and-so. Are they any good? Like, that was very inexpensive, right? We put a lot of work into telling this story about why this matters. We put a lot of work. Local first software was the result of a very long, almost like marketing messaging process internally at the lab to find the right way to talk about this work, right? Like people talk about offline first, right? That's a similar but distinct concept. And we were like, no one cares about being offline. You say local first and people, oh, that sounds good. I like to eat local. Local brewery, local business. Yeah, let's do that. And like the resonance, the emotional tenor of this work, right? A lot of this work is like really nerdy, distributed systems, merge algorithms and like, Bloom filter, LSM tree stuff. But the expression of that into the public is this story about, hey, wouldn't it be nice if you had your data and your software on your computer? It's about you. It's about what you need. And this whole work came out of talking to journalists and scientists, and their not mistrust for abstract reasons of the cloud, but their personal pain of adopting these cloud products, and then they go away, right? The software goes on an incredible journey without you. There's a whole stump speech about this that I'm going to spare you. But if you look down this research area list, you can see these 3 more areas of work that we're working in. And these are themes that have emerged in our work. And our work, again, is about trying to help scientists, journalists, writers to have the tools they need. And these are things that we think will help. These are almost ingredients rather than anything else. And so you saw Jeffrey here talking about malleable software if you're at the last workshop. This idea of malleable software, it's a term we got from Chernovsky. And it's this idea, again, that maybe software should not be a closed box that you have no control over, but something you can adapt to your needs. And so we're looking for not just primary research output, discoveries in an intellectual sense, but we're also looking for how do we get it out there? How do we tell stories that will inspire? How do we tell stories that will motivate? And how do we create movements that will mobilize? To that end, one of the things that tactically we really take advantage of, again, your strengths are your weaknesses, right? A writer friend of mine said characters don't have strengths and weaknesses, they have traits, right? And you put a character into different environments and their strengths will become weaknesses and vice versa. And so for us, we have this weaknesses which you can't afford to hire staff out of Google every day, right? And we couldn't afford to retain them if we did. But sometimes we can borrow them for a little while between jobs. And then when they go to the next job, all these things that we talk about, they bring the spice to us, their ideas, their brilliant concepts, but they take the spice with them, the things that we're doing, the language that we use, the intellectual frameworks that we have, into their next company, and they become our eyes and ears. And this is so effective, right? It's not bad. I mean, like, professors know this, right? Your grad students are extensions of your kind of influence. But I think so often people who work in industry, they're like, oh no, we need to worry about retention. It's like, no, you need to worry about people remembering the time they spent working with you fondly, so that they'll take your calls, so they'll answer your emails.
Another question. On that point, how do you deal with, I'll call it proprietary information? People don't like necessarily to bring in others to deal with, stuff that they view as theirs, or
Yeah, that's
commercial value, that kind of thing.
This is a great question. Culturally, in the software world, there's a strong, at least in the parts of the software world that we work in, there's a strong open source undercurrent. And we definitely take advantage of that. We have partnership plans and programs where we work with companies. But having worked in startup land, people will try and make you sign an NDA before they tell you their dumb startup idea. And like, if your idea is any good, you're going to spend the next 10 years shouting it from the top of every rooftop, trying to convince anyone to care. I don't worry about people stealing our ideas. I worry about wasting my time. This is the mea culpa part. This transfer function we were just talking about is, famously the easiest and most solved part of research, which is taking your good ideas and making them successful. It was really great being at the university, seeing all these labs, and seeing some of the successes that they've had in medical technology. Really inspiring. We have tried a bunch of things, right? And as an independent group, we are very free to make all the mistakes that we want without any oversight. And so we've done a lot of things that have worked to varying degrees. And I'm conscious of the passage of time, so I'm not going to get too into this. We did a direct spin out. We took some of our technology and some of our people. They went and started a company. It still exists. It hasn't paid for the lab. I'm glad we did it, but as a structural cost, losing like a third of your team to a spin out, it's not easy to do those often. We do a lot of open source work. We put things out there. Again, as a research lab, our software is often not good, right, in like a usability sense. Brett Victor doesn't release his software basically ever, because if you actually got your hands on it, you'd realize that it's a sketchy research prototype. But if you see a video of the inspiring ideas embodied in that prototype, you're excited, you want to try this thing, you want to build the real version. You try the kind of like held together by duct tape and baling wire version, maybe you're just, it doesn't fly, this isn't my thing. So outputting code sometimes is counterproductive. As I mentioned earlier, we do some partnerships, and we have this one project that we think is really strategic. It's called AutoMerge. It's this like sync engine. It's strategic to our research, but it's valuable to the community. And so that's in a neat spot where we have a contributor on our team whose time is paid for by people who adopt the open source project. And they can pay him, and he provides sort of support and consulting to people in the community. And that's been a really awesome partnership because they get what they need, which is reliability, someone they can call when something's wrong. Because before they'd open GitHub issues and I'd ignore them. Because I'm in the middle of a research project, I got a grant proposal to write, I'm head down. And I go, oh geez, someone reported a crash bug like 3 weeks ago. So Alex is great for that. And we get a lot from that too, because the quality of the software is elevated by this investment of energy. And so that's been a good partnership. And crucially, we don't want to spin it out because we think it's vital to our research. Stuart.
Peter, so if you're you're kind of coming up with the ideas, you're working on some of the formative pieces of this, and then passing this on to others to go develop and take to market. How do you fund that?
We'll come back to that. Oh, it's getting away from here. Okay. The funding is that a helicopter full of money comes every year, right? I have the coconut headset, and I do the dance with the sticks and it comes back, and so far it's working. Look, it's the next slide. Sustainability, right? Research is an endothermic reaction, right? It produces valuable products, but it requires a constant input of energy. If you hire a sales rep at an enterprise SaaS business, their carried quota is about 2 million, last time I paid close attention. The quota of the average researcher is, just kidding. And if you hire more sales reps, you'll have more money. You hire more researchers, you'll have less money. Unless somehow it turns into $1 trillion, right? But that's the a miracle occurs step. And so you have this hard problem, right? Which is this gap. So a lot of my time and energy, unsurprising as director, goes into looking for people who care about these problems, right? And so far the base of our funding is primarily people who have sold companies and hate software as a, I don't want to say hate software, I was overstating it. People who would like the world of technology to look and feel different. They want these tools. They want a different kind of software ecology. And for less money than they're going to spend on an angel investment in a company, they can put it to us and we can make it work. That same story, actually, you have a portfolio of companies, venture capitalists, and they're struggling, and they need what we do, but they can't do it because that's not their job, so fund us. That's worked a little bit. And then there's all the classic things, grants and partnerships and licensing and so on. But yeah, I would love to say that we had tipped over into exothermism, but we've not. So it's an ongoing thing. And long term, we're 10 years in, I'll say. That's something. But I'm always thinking about how do I diversify the base of supporters, because it's fragile if you rely on too few people. And of course, the research itself is just wrestling any kind of information out of the unknown is hard, and managing people is hard, and researchers are weird and have their own foibles, and we're all familiar with this. Okay, so what's next? Why are we doing this? This is from Engelbart's Augmenting Human Intellect piece. It's a pencil with a brick, yes. The theory that we have, the belief that we hold, is that all of our technological lives have many bricks on them, right? And this is an unproven theory, because you can take the brick off the pencil once and make it a better pencil, but once you've taken the brick off the pencil, you can't keep doing that, right? You've already fixed the problem. And so we think we have a lot of sort of self-inflicted problems, but we don't know where the frontier lies, and so we're looking at that. This is a great Thoreau quote. It's not enough to be busy, so are the ants. The question is, what are we busy about? And so what are we busy about? I'm going to briefly cover a little of our research. We basically feel that the modern software ecology is a food court. You might be at the food court ordering lunch. You can get a good lunch fast. But if you don't want what they're selling, neither you nor the person in the restaurant has any ability to fix it. We want software to feel more like a workshop. This is Casey Neistat's workshop, where you can make anything you need. Notably, a workshop requires different abilities to be productive in. A kitchen is a much harder place to make a meal than a food court. That doesn't mean that it is worse or better. It serves a different goal. So we think about these tools for thought. What are the tools for thought? Right? The notepad, hand tools. What is a kitchen knife for the mind? So we're exploring. This is one line of work that we're doing. This is universal version control. We think every piece of software that you use should have baked into it the idea of change over time, the ability to ask questions about something. Right now, this is all bespoke. Every app needs
Has
this.
Microsoft PowerPoint expressed any interest in that?
We have many versions of this.
A big hole.
Yes. This is a figure from our Upwelling paper. You can see Patrick in the background. And we're working with writing tool companies that are building on these ideas, and we're building ourselves. This is Crosscut. This is a visual programming environment. One of our other questions that we're asking and have been asking for years is, what if programming had grown out of the pen? Programming grew out of the typewriter. What does it look like to have not an isomorphism of a textual programming language, but a natively visual way of expressing dynamism and thinking about systems and processes with your hands? We talked a little bit about local first software, and Jeffrey was here talking about malleable software, so I'm just going to cite by reference. You should probably watch his talk. It was great. And of course, all of this is being impacted by changes in what's possible. And we are not a lab about AI. I think unless you're making AI as a first order thing, it's a mistake to frame your work that way, right? But we are a lab heavily influenced by AI. AI is creating a whole new categorical possibilities in this tools for thought. And as this little example, little spice from earlier, remember, when we write, this tool here now has a bar where you can have a conversation with an LLM partner about the piece as well as your human collaborators. And it interacts homogeneously through that. It doesn't just dump text in and you're like, did it fix an Oxford comma or did it completely lose the point? Right? It creates changes the same way that you create changes, and so you can see the history and understand what happened. We think that's interesting. And ultimately, this is coming back to that original vision that we talked about, the man-machine symbiosis, right? That we are all going to become, we can become more, right? Yes, an AI can beat a human on the chessboard. It's not that hard anymore to find, AIs that can crush every living human at chess. But still, the best players are not human or AI. The best players are centaurs. They are collaborations between humans and AI. And we think that is the greatest potential for sort of human flourishing from this work. We want to help build tools that will not replace us, but that will empower us. Right? And to come back to this Bill Gates quote, most people overestimate what they can achieve in a year, and they underestimate what they can achieve in 10 years. We're 10 years in. I think we've come pretty far. I'm proud of our work. We've created at least one cultural movement. We've done a lot of great research, dozens of projects. I'm excited for the next 10 years, and I hope that I can leave this lab to somebody else who will do a much better job with the paperwork than me. So it feels good to be at that 10th birthday this year. And just in closing, I want to say again that ultimately we believe in this tool user culture. We want more people to be working on this problem, more people to be contributing in this space. A robot is a very visible way of giving a surgeon a superpower. How could we give a journalist a superpower? How can we give experimentalists superpowers in the lab? Brett Victor is working with a genomics lab to try and bring these concepts he has to the workbench, right? So anyone can have this power. I think often about, this is the view behind Pathfinder on Mars. We are way the heck out there, kind of isolated. And what we're doing is we're trying to design houses on a planet we can't live on. And so sometimes it's hard, but I find the work very inspiring, and I wouldn't want to do anything else. So that's what I've got. I'm sorry, I should have left more room for questions, but thanks for having me.
Well, we actually have time for a couple because we started early. Terry, yes.
Where you have the process of what you described, how you guys works, with every 2 weeks you get together, have you thought about that get together as a research project, how you can change that? I mean, the research into that. Why 2 weeks? Why not every day?
Yeah, this is a great question. So we actually meet every week. We try and alternate between show and tell and Zoom out, which is a joke because we used to meet on Zoom. But Zoom out is inspired by Hamming's You and Your Research, where he comments on how the physicists who ate lunch with the chemists were the ones who went on to win Nobel Prizes. And I'm paraphrasing heavily here. But basically that you need to reserve time to think about the big picture, to talk about the big topics. And anecdotally, what kind of happens with the show and tells is that people know they have a Friday show and tell coming, so they work to that. And then the following week, all of the sins they committed the week before to get the demo working have to be atoned for. And so that week it tends to get lost in sort of thinking about what to do next. And then that leads to another one another week later. So that's, because we also work often with grad students, we have a macro scale where we end up with sort of like a spring, summer, and fall like trimester. and that just aligns to like the academic calendar and also just like Western holidays. You come back from Christmas, you need a month to get things off the ground again. That gets you into April or May. Then the grad students are available over the summer, so you do a thing. And if you don't start in September on the next one, you're not going to be done by Christmas, and then you have this awkward hangover bit. So, you know, these things are a little emergent from the dynamics of the communities we work in. Other questions?
Anyone else?
Jonna?
Yeah, so a couple things. First of all, thank you so much for the quote about the physicists who eat lunch with the chemists going on to win Nobel Prizes, because quite frankly, that's what NEXT is all about, is letting us physicists eat lunch with chemists and biologists and everything else. That said, I have to confess that I was sort of put off by your dismissiveness of other forms of research because, number one, it's not actually correct. The government has done a lot of great things, including the internet, and very large companies like AT&T have done non-trivial things like Unix and...
Absolutely.
Hold on, because as I started listening, I understood what you're really getting at is much more of a meta thing, which is more about the DNA of research and how to help the people that are doing research do better research. And as I thought about that, I realized there are people in this room who are at government labs, who are at traditional research universities. What lesson should they take away from this? Like, they're not all going to go start ink and switch. So what are they going to do?
I don't know what lesson they should take, and I appreciate the question. I'm sorry. For time, I had to cut a lot of this discussion of this history and relationship with industrial research and classical research. And we are a pivot point. You know, we're a fulcrum, not the prime mover, right? Industry is going to scale these ideas. Academia is the source of a lot of our, you know, raw material, right? So we work, for example, with Martin Kleppmann at the University of Cambridge. He is the guy who spends 3 years proving some, you know, algorithm works in Isabelle. We build the first version and write a nice blog post about it, and then industry ships it, right? And that's part of how we can survive is as this little transfer function between the two. So I'm sorry if it came across as dismissive. Not only do I have admiration and respect, but like a huge amount of my time and energy has gone into studying places like Bell Labs. You know, we work with Dan Ingalls from Park. And the issue is not that those things weren't great, it's that they aren't doing it now. So this is the modern era. We're trying to do this in spite of the modern era. Alan Kay says you can't do it without government funding. I can't wait for the government to change its mind. I'm not going to be here forever. We're going to try anyway. So that's the frame I put it in.
All right. I think Jonah's just trying to get under your skin a little too.
No, I welcome.
No, not at all. I actually have a lot of
critique.
friends here from FFRDCs and universities, and I'm sure they're sitting here thinking, smart guy, fun conversation, but he just dismissed everything I've done, and I have empirical proof that I did it, so I'm not sure where he's going with this.
Please throw tomatoes or ask hard questions.
All right. Peter, thank you very much. Really
All right.
appreciate you being
Thanks,
here.
Tony.
Thanks.